That's why I wanted to get my license. So I have people.
Well, very happy Wednesday evening to you all. Here we are once again for a ham radio or amateur radio class. Don't mind the coughing in the background. It's just the crew. I'm Gary, the instructor. Whiskey 4 Echo Echo Yankee is the call sign. And I am so proud of you all who've been participating on a regular basis, either in our Zoom classroom or watching on YouTube, because we're nearly done. We're at Chapter 7 in this book. The American Radio Relay League License Manual for the Technician, 5th edition. This is the book you want. It's got all the questions and all the answers in the back. Yeah, Chapter 7. In fact, let's take the laptop. This is the schedule. Tonight we're going to be talking about licensing regulations. Then we'll next week be talking about operating regulations. Then the following, on March the 25th, it'll be Chapter 9, Safety, the last chapter in the book, but maybe it should be the first chapter in the book, because that's kind of important. And then, optionally, if you'd like to come back on April 1st, it will take 2 practice tests together. Oh, and also the week before, we'll take 1 practice test together. I'll put together a 35-question multiple choice test, and we'll see how we do. But you remember when you first saw the book, and you first saw all the material we were going to cover, and you went, oh my gosh, I'll never understand any of that? But I hope it's coming clear, or clearer as we have gone along, and you can do this. You can pass the test. I hope you've got a place to take your test. Okay, my computer is just locked up. What's going on here? There we go. I don't know why I did that. If you have a place where you're going to take your exam, the 35-question test, a local ham club probably is giving it. If you need to find a club, here's some resources up top. The ARRL Find a Club link there, or a place where you can find amateur radio exams. Ah, good, the computer's working again. And then you can also go to hamstudy.org/sessions. And then put your zip code in there, and it'll tell you where all of the testing sessions. So early April, that's when we want you to target, find an upcoming test session, have a target date, and know that's when you're going to take your exam. Before you go to the exam session, or if you're going to take an exam online, you can do that. I don't recommend it as your first, but you could do that. You always have to obtain what they call a federal registry number, an FRN number from the FCC. There's instructions at the link down below. And remember, you'll be getting this presentation as a PDF tomorrow. I'll be sending out emails with links, or if you look in the description box on the YouTube webpage for this video, you'll see the Dropbox link there. All of this presentation will be there. These will be active links. You can just click on it. But obtain an FRN number. It's free, but it'll associate your name and this number, and the volunteer examiners will need that in order for you to take your test. They used to use your Social Security number, but they discontinued that a couple of years ago. Take practice tests if you can. Here's the ARRL exam review website, highly recommended. We're not done yet in the book, but you could start taking practice tests now. A lot of the answers are just common sense. So take your time, go through it, and see how you're doing. You don't have to get them all right. We want you to get them all right, but 74% is the passing grade. That's all you need. So get ready, and here we go with Chapter 7. And Chapter 7, licensing regulations, is a pretty short chapter, so we're going to get you out early tonight, both this week and next week. So yay! So let's check in here with amateur radio. Well, what is amateur radio from a licensing regulation perspective? Well, it's an official class of service designated by the Federal Communications Commission. It's not business band radio. It's non-commercial voluntary communications. It's for persons who are interested in radio technique solely with a personal aim and without, here's my favorite word, pecuniary interest, meaning you're not doing it to make money. Pecuniary, from the Communications Act of 1934. And Amateur radio also enhances international goodwill because there are amateur radio operators worldwide, and we make contact with them, and we're representing the United States of America. Did you know that you will also be an artiste? Yes, you will, because amateur radio contributes to the advancement of the radio art. That's also from the law. And new techniques, new innovations actually come from amateur radio and then later make their way into the commercial world. So this is something we can be proud of. The FCC has an entire section for amateur radio regulations. It's called Part 97. And it sets the frequency bands that amateur radio operators are allowed to use. Come back to me just for a second, if you would, Marion. So the color chart, where you have these with, and it's in your book as well, where we have the frequency bands that we are authorized to transmit on. That comes from the FCC Part 97 regulations. This just puts it in a very readable form. And so, back to, yeah, thank you. Sets the frequency bands, sets the privileges of different license classes. So in the United States, there are 3 license classes that you can get licensed now: technician class, general class, and the amateur extra class. There were some other classes that existed before, such as the advanced class and the novice class. People are licensed at those levels, and they can renew their license every 10 years, but if they don't advance, they stay at that level. You can't get those licenses anymore. The FCC coordinates U.S. interests with the International Telecommunications Union, and the FCC, this is something that some people question, they may inspect an amateur station at any time. Okay, they're not going to come and knock on your door at midnight. Don't worry about that. They don't have the staff for that. But technically, they have that right. So how many licenses can you have? You can only have 1 amateur radio license per person. But I always say that an amateur radio license is two licenses in one, because you get a license to build an amateur radio station, a station license, and you get a license to be an operator, to operate a station. So, and all of this is outlined again in Part 97, and if you'd like to read it, here's a URL from the American Radio Relay League where you can download the latest PDF version of it. Now, it's in Government Ease. So if you're having a hard time sleeping one night, you might want to download this and start reading, and I think that problem will be alleviated right away. You always want to keep your information with the FCC up to date. And it always used to be that you had to keep your mailing address up to date because the wrong mailing address can lead to revocation of your license. But something just a few years ago, also, the wrong email address can now lead to revocation of your license. The FCC has moved to communicating pretty much strictly by email. And so if they need to get a hold of you about an issue with your license or something, they want to be able to contact you. So at the FCC's Universal Licensing System website, you always want to make sure that your email address is kept up to date. That way you won't have any problems or any issues. So amateur licenses, we mentioned the email must be maintained. An amateur license is good for a period of 10 years. If your license were to lapse, let's say you're at the end of that 10-year period, you must stop transmitting. You can't transmit. But you have a 2-year grace period where you can renew your license by just going to the FCC Universal Licensing System website and apply to have the license renewed. That 2-year grace period, you will have to pay, it's $35 for 10 years, and maybe a processing fee, but other than that, you don't have to test again. If you wait outside that 2-year period, if you go 3 years, well, then you're going to have to retest, at least take the technician test again, depending on the class of license. Used to be the FCC would mail you your license in the mail, and I remember back when I got my first license, I was waiting for that to come. No more. they actually just process your license when you pass your test. All of that paperwork is processed, and then your name and call sign will appear in the Universal Licensing System database. They'll probably send you an email saying congratulations and here's a link, and you can go to that database by clicking and download a PDF of the official copy of your license. That's your license. So you can frame it and put it up on the wall, and away you go. But when you're in the database, then you're licensed. That's really all it takes. We talked about the FRN, the Federal Registration Number, and then if you and 3 of your friends decided, hey, let's form an amateur radio club, okay, you do it formally, and then you could apply for a call sign for the club, a club call sign, but you have to have at least 4 members in order for that to be possible. And I mentioned the Universal Licensing System website. Here it is. This is what it looks like. It's a little daunting at first, but really it's not that bad to work through. There's also a companion website called CORS. Here's where you do the application work, and CORS is where you pay. But they work together, and it's pretty straightforward. The FCC is responsible for what goes on in the non-military portion of the radio spectrum in the United States. We say that they're the radio sheriff. Actually, hams, though, do a lot of self-policing as well, because we want to make sure that we're responsible in using the spectrum that we have available. As I mentioned, there are 3 classes of ham licenses today: the technician, the general, and the amateur extra. The other classes that we mentioned, novice, conditional, tech plus, and advanced, they're previous classes of license. Some people may still be licensed at those levels. That's okay, and they can renew every 10 years at that level. That's okay, but right now you can't apply for any of those licenses: tech, general, and amateur extra. That's all that's available. All right, but that's all we need. Moving on to some questions. Let's see how we do. So in the Zoom classroom, you can go ahead and unmute. And the question here is, which of the following is part of the basis and purpose of the amateur radio service?
D, Delta.
Charlie.
No. It is Charlie, exactly. Well, we don't provide communications for nonprofit organizations. We can, but it's not part of the law. We do not try to provide personal radio communications for as many citizens as possible. No, only those who go through the licensing process. So FRS, Family Radio Service, might be for A. So in this case, advancing skills in the technical and communication phases of the radio art. Radio art, that's what we want to remember, right? And which agency regulates and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service?
That's easy. C, Charlie.
Yes, indeed. The Federal Candy Company, as some people call it, FCC. And how many operator primary station license grants may be held by any one person?
One.
Exactly, so alpha, 1. And these are the actual test questions and the actual answers that might be on your test. The thing is that the answers will be in a different order, so don't memorize A, B, C, or D. That won't help you. So what proves that the FCC has issued an operator or primary license grant?
Charlie.
Yeah, when the license appears in the FCC Universal Licensing System database. And for which license classes are new licenses currently available from the FCC?
Delta.
Delta is correct. Technician, general, and amateur extra. And what may happen if the FCC is unable to reach you by email?
License
Bravo, yes. Revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license, or both. So which of the following can result in revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license? That's the same question coming at it from a different way.
Bravo.
Indeed, bravo. That, again, failure to provide and maintain a correct email address. Oh my. What is the normal term for an FCC-issued amateur radio license?
C, Charlie.
10 years. So you pay $35, so it's $3.50 each year. And what is the grace period for renewal if an amateur license expires?
Alpha.
Yet Alpha is correct. 2 years. You have 2 years in which you can renew the license, though you cannot transmit until you get it renewed. Oh, how soon after passing the examination for your first amateur radio license may you transmit on the amateur radio bands?
Bravo.
Not Bravo. Charlie. Your license is not going to be on the ARRL website. It's going to be part of the FCC's database. So as soon as your operator license grant appears in the FCC's license database, then you have a call sign and you can begin to transmit. If your license has expired and is still within the allowable grace period, may you continue to transmit on the amateur radio bands?
D,
Yeah.
no.
No, you must wait until the license has been renewed and it shows up in the database. And when must the station and its records be available for FCC inspection?
Bravo.
Yeah, the rule is at any time upon request by an FCC representative. And which of the following is a requirement for the issuance of a club station license grant?
Bravo.
Yeah, you must have at least 4 members in the club. All right, you're doing great. Section 7.2 is bans and privileges. So I mentioned that the FCC is the radio sheriff, but also amateurs police themselves. The FCC has their volunteer monitor program of people that are listening on the bands. We also have frequency coordinators that coordinate frequencies used by amateur radio repeaters and auxiliary stations. And we have the ARRL band plans, which tell us where we can find certain signals of certain modulation types and modes. So we try to stick to that to keep things organized. If you wanted to put up a radio repeater in your area when you have your technician license, you could. You're authorized to do that, but you will want to coordinate that repeater through your frequency coordinator in your area. For South Carolina, it's the Southeast Repeater Association, so this is their website. It's been updated since 2019. I didn't update the slide, but SARA is our group. I don't know in your area, there's probably a different group, obviously, and you can find out who that is. We have a number of amateur radio bands you saw on the color chart, and some of those bands we are primary. It's exclusively used by amateur radio operators. But other bands are what we call shared bands. I think we looked at the 40-meter band and we looked at AM radio signals, and there you saw international shortwave broadcasters. We're sharing the 40-meter band with international shortwave broadcasters. The 70-centimeter band, the UHF band, is shared with other services as well. So when hams have a secondary allocation, so 40 meters or 70 centimeters, we must protect the primary users, especially if those primary users have anything to do with radio location or navigation. So we can't communicate with them and we can't interfere with them. So just keep that in mind for shared bands. Using the ARRL color chart, the band chart, the question arises, can technician operators use single sideband on high frequency? Okay, that's a pretty broad question. High frequency is anywhere from 3 to 30 megahertz. But the 10 meter band is within that. And if you look closely at the color chart, you'll see that area there between 28.3 to 28.5 megahertz. It says voice or phone. That's where you could transmit single sideband as a technician class operator on the HF bands. And in fact, this last weekend, we had the ARRL single sideband DX contest. 10 meters was chock-a-block full of signals, and there was a lot of DX stations from other countries in that band segment. So you could actually build your country count by actually working foreign stations using voice on the 10 meter band. When we first started out, we talked about, Ohm's law and Watt's law, ear pi, and we also talked about the relationship between wavelength and frequency. I just want to remind you of this because if you get lost on a test, this might come in handy. Remember, 300 divided by the frequency in megahertz will give you the wavelength in meters, or vice versa. 300 divided by the wavelength in meters will give you the frequency. We'll show you why that's important coming up. Technician class restrictions. We mentioned you've got the capabilities to do voice and data on 10 meters. There's also on the 80 meter, 40 meter, and 15 meter bands, there are sections where you can do Morse code with your technician class license. And in fact, those are the old novice bands where I got started as well. So if you'd like to learn Morse code, very slow speed Morse code goes on there. Yeah, you could begin transmitting internationally right now using Morse code. In that section on 10 meters, you can transmit CW or radio teletype, data signals like FT8, or single sideband voice. Above 50 megahertz, really, your technician license gives you full capabilities. 6 meters, 2 meters, and 1.25 meters do have some restrictions for all amateurs. Both 6 and 2 meters have small Morse code only subbands at the very low end of each of those bands. So that's 6 and 2 meters, Morse code CW only at the very bottom. And 1.25 meter band, or 220 megahertz, has a separate subband from 219 to 220. It's set aside for fixed data signals, point-to-point links, things like that, fixed message forwarding. Otherwise, there are no mode restrictions above the 70 centimeter band for any amateur radio operator. So these are the things I want you to remember. Bottom of 6 and 2, CW only, and the bottom of the 1.25 meter band, data signals only. In your day-to-day activities, this won't affect you at all, but these are test questions. If you wanted to operate on HF, on 10 meters, or on 80, 40, or 15, the maximum output power your class of license allows you to operate is 200 watts. Remember the old incandescent light bulbs, the 100-watt light bulbs? Well, 2 light bulbs. That's what you can operate with right now. Now, for VHF and above, for 6 meters and above, you can use 1,500 watts, the maximum legal limit that anyone can use. So one of the incentives, though, to get you to upgrade your license to general is that you can use 1,500 watts generally on most of the HF bands then as well. You're not restricted to 200 watts, but keep that in mind, all right? And when you're calling CQ, we talked about this before when we talked about communicating with other hams. Remember the 3 rules? Listen, listen, listen. See if there's a conversation going on. If you're on Morse code, you send QRL question mark. Da 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 da. That means, is the frequency in use? Or if you're on voice, you can just say, is the frequency in use? And you can use the ARRL charts or other resources to make sure that you're operating on a frequency that you're authorized to operate on with your class of license. That comes in really when you get your general class and you're on the HF bands. The general class has a smaller allocation that they have to be aware of. You can't operate on CB. That's what that picture is all about there. That's 27 megahertz. That's a CB frequency. No, 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 no. We have our own bands. That's where we operate. How do I know if a band is open? Whether signals are coming in? Well, there are different ways that you can do it. You can check spotting websites. This is one that I like, DX Heat, where you can actually see what we call spots. That's these things right here. They're telling you what stations are on the air at that very moment. Stations have made contact and they've posted it to the internet, so you get a real-time look. You also get UTC time up here. You get a look at propagation on the HF bands, how much activity there is, disturbances with the Earth's magnetic fields, etc. That's really handy to help you out. There are also Morse code beacon stations that the Northern California DX Foundation has put on the air around the world. And so if you look up these frequencies and you look up the time, then you can check, can I receive that beacon? And if you can, then you know that propagation is good to that area. And then you can also use online resources like PSK Reporter or WhisperNet. Are two that you can find where contacts are going on around the world. So there are various online resources that can help you out. Okay, more questions. So what is the FCC Part 97 definition of a beacon? This is the Northern California DX Foundation.
The altitude.
Yeah, if you can hear it, then the propagation is good. It's an amateur station transmitting communications for the purposes of observing propagation or related experimental activities. The beacon stations are automated. They send Morse code, maximum power of 100 watts, and no humans are involved. Which of the following entities recommends transmit-receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations?
Bravo.
Bravo.
In our area, it's the Southeastern Repeater Association. They're volunteers. They're volunteer frequency coordinators that are recognized by local amateurs. And so if you want to put up a radio repeater, contact them. The whole point of it is that you'll get frequencies that are not being used in your area, so it cuts down on the interference. So who selects a frequency coordinator? It's kind of a logical thing, but what do you think?
Bravo.
No.
Charlie.
It's the people who are going to be making, putting up the repeaters. It's amateur operators in a local or regional area whose stations are eligible to be repeaters or auxiliary stations. They're the ones that select frequency coordinators. It's democratic.
This is the one I keep getting wrong on the practice test.
Aha. Yep. So how can we get you to remember? Just look for repeater or auxiliary stations, because that's what they do. They license repeater or auxiliary stations, or they give you the frequencies for those. They don't license them. But that's maybe the phrase to look for. All right. So which of the following frequency ranges are available for phone or single sideband operation by technician licensees? You remember?
Oh, Lord, we gotta remember that.
Yeah. It is, Charlie, 28.3 to 28.5 megahertz. You'll want to remember that because when you get your license, you can operate there.
And they will ask that question several different ways on the practice test.
They may. Which frequency is in the 6-meter amateur band? So if you can't bring the color chart in to the test session, but remember that 300 divided by formula? So 300 divided by 6 would be 50. So look for the 50 megahertz frequency, and there it is, 52.525. Bravo. All right. Which amateur band includes 146.52 megahertz?
Delta.
2 meters.
Yes, it is 2 meters, or you could take 300 divided by 2. That'll give you 150, and that's close to 146. So, yeah. Or you can take 300 divided by 146.52, and it'll give you close to 2. That's how I wanted to do that. All right, how may amateurs use the 219 to 220 megahertz segment of the 1.25 meter band?
D, Delta.
Yeah, this is that subband that is for fixed digital message forwarding systems only. It's a restriction on all amateurs. And on which HF bands does the technician class operator have phone privileges?
Ten meters.
Voice privileges, phone privileges, single sideband, 10 meters only. And which of the following VHF UHF band segments are limited to CW only?
Alpha.
The very bottom of the 6 meter band and the very bottom of the 2 meter band, so alpha 50 to 50.1 and 144 to 144.1 megahertz. How are U.S. amateurs restricted in segments of bands where the amateur radio service is secondary?
This is one I used to get wrong too on the practice test.
Alpha.
It is alpha. We must avoid interfering with the primary users. All right, here's some of my students have said, when in doubt, pick the longest answer. I'm not saying it's universal, but in this case, it works. So what is the maximum peak envelope power output for technician class operators in their HF band segments? How many light bulbs?
200 alpha.
Yeah, 200 watts in HF. And except for some specific restrictions, what is the maximum peak envelope power output for technician class operators using frequencies above 30 megahertz? How many light bulbs?
Delta. D.
Yep, 1500 watts. All right, we're moving right along. International rules. You heard me mention this before, that the FCC coordinates communications activities with the International Telecommunications Union. The ITU is a part of the United Nations, actually, but they're based in Geneva, Switzerland. And they coordinate all civilian telecommunications activities with various countries and governments around the world. The ITU, as I mentioned, is based in Europe, and they've set the world into 3 zones for their organization. So let me turn on my laser pointer here. There we go. So they're here in Europe, so they're region 1, they made themselves. And then you follow with the sun around the world, region 2, North America, Central America, South America. And then region 3, Australia, Asia, and the Pacific areas out here, regions 1, 2, and 3, which is important because sometimes amateur radio frequency allocations are different between the various regions. I just included this slide for completeness. There are also ITU zones. The only time I've ever heard them being used is in the IARU DX contest that happens in July every year, but be aware of those. Okay. So the ITU regional differences, as I mentioned, frequency allocations may be different for European amateurs that are operating in 40 meters, different than the US amateurs who are operating on 40 meters. They can actually do single sideband voice on some of the low frequencies on 40 meters, whereas we are restricted to the upper end of 40 meters. It can make some interesting contacts where they're transmitting down way low and you might have to transmit way high. Also know that other radio services may share amateur frequencies in various ITU regions, so you have to be aware of that. To operate in a foreign country, yes, you can, but it must be authorized by that country. either specifically for you or through an international agreement. And there is an international agreement between the United States and Europe, for example. If you happen to be sailing on a U.S. flag vessel and the captain of the vessel agrees, if you are a licensed U.S. amateur, you may operate, if he agrees, and then the location's ITU region frequency allocations apply. So if the vessel is in, for example, the Mediterranean, then you'd be having to restrict yourselves to the ITU region 1 frequency allocations. You cannot likely operate on a cruise ship. There are ham cruises, but they're few and far between, and most of the time they are not U.S. flag vessels, and the captain of the ships will not approve operation because of the interference to their communications. So that's not going to happen. Generally, in amateur radio, permitted communications are those that are incidental to the purposes of the amateur radio service. Signal strength, what kind of antennas are you using, transmitter output power, and remarks of a personal nature. So, incidental to the purposes of the amateur radio service and remarks of a personal nature. Prohibited communications, that occurs when a country or countries inform the ITU that amateur radio communications are prohibited with their country. At the moment, there are no such prohibitions. So U.S. amateurs could communicate with any country in the world. However, there are no amateur radio operators right now in North Korea, so that's not going to happen. And it used to be that there were none in Yemen, except some recently DXpeditions have operated from Yemen, so that was overcome. We mentioned the U.S. flag vessel in international waters. With the permission of the captain, you may be able to operate. So come back to me just for a second, if you would, Marianne. I love the hobby. I'm excited about it, you can tell, because it has such a rich history and tradition, and it's got a lot of very interesting people in it as well, with a lot of characters, a lot of stories and whatnot. So I mentioned there are no operators now, amateur radio operators in North Korea. But North Korea, in developing their economy and whatnot, well, they needed to, put in cell phones and cellular telephone systems in North Korea. And the Finnish company Nokia got the contract. And so one of their representatives who was involved in helping North Korea put in cellular telephone systems is a ham, a very well-known DXer, a person who's gone on DXpeditions around the world, still active, still going strong, Marty Lane. So come on back. He got permission, unique permission, to operate in North Korea while he was working with Nokia there. And this was his QSL card there on the left. He operated as P51BH, and that's Marty there on the right. And if you get a chance, go to a ham fest, especially one of the bigger ham fests. I got a chance to go to the European Ham Fest in Friedrichshafen, Germany. And had a great time there. And as I was at the airport getting ready to come back, who do I spy? It was security. They made us take our belts off and put them through. And so all of the men in line were holding their pants up with their hands. And who do I spy holding his pants up but Marty Lane? And so I got a chance to meet Marty and talk with him briefly there at the airport in Friedrichshafen. This is after we put our belts back on, by the way. It was kind of cool. All right, questions? What types of international communications are an FCC licensed amateur radio station permitted to make?
Alpha.
Communications incidental to the purposes of the amateur radio service and remarks of a personal nature or personal character. From which of the following locations may an FCC licensed amateur station transmit? with the captain's permission from any vessel or craft located in international waters and documented or registered in the United States. So if the vessel is registered in Liberia, that's not going to work. With which countries are FCC licensed amateur radio stations prohibited from exchanging communications?
Alpha?
Yeah, any country whose administration has notified the International Telecommunications Union that it objects to such communications. At the moment, there are none. Even North Korea has not objected, except there's no operators there. All right. Call signs, this is something you're going to probably be interested in, because when you pass your test, and you will, the paperwork will be processed by your volunteer examiners, and you will be issued an amateur radio call sign. So amateur call signs always have a prefix and a suffix separated by a region number. So my call sign here, the prefix is W, and the suffix is EEY, and the region number is 4 because I'm in South Carolina. You will hear sometimes people say W4 is the prefix, and that's not wrong, but just for purposes of the test, that's what we want to know. Shorter call signs are sought after. The reason being, in contests and other activities like that, they get through. There's a de-expedition going on right now in the island of Bouvet, and they're operating single sideband. And if you can, transmit your short call sign, they have a greater chance of understanding it and getting it through. So they're reserved for the senior. When you advance to the general class and then to the extra class, then you're able to get the shorter call signs. New hams will get what we call 2x3s, which are 2 letters, a region number, and then 3 letters following. So here's an example, KR4KHO, which when I looked it up just a few days ago, that was the latest call sign issued in the 4 region where I am right now, KR4KHO. Now, if you don't like that call sign, you can change it, but you have to go through a process of going to the ULS database and request what is known as a vanity call sign. And you can pick your own of those that are available. How do you know what's available? Well, I highly recommend this website, AE7Q. He's got all of the latest information on what call signs have been issued and what's available. You can put a call sign in, see if it's available. For technicians, we mentioned you can get a 2x3. You can also get a 1x3. You're also authorized for, so like my call sign is a 1x3, W4EEY. 1, 3. So you can get a 1x3 or a 2x3 if you have a technician class license. You can't get this one because nobody's got 4 characters at the end, but you can get these call sign labels to wear to Hamfest and whatnot. People like them. All right. Club vanity call signs. Remember, how many club members does it take? It takes 4 to have, then you can apply for a club call sign. Only the listed trustee of the club station license must apply for the new call sign, vanity call sign. Again, you must have 4 members. So the Greer Amateur Radio Club, of which I'm a member, for example, has a call sign. Also, the Anderson Radio Club, of which I'm a member as well, has a call sign, a club call sign. So the shortest call signs are 1x1s. So there's a event that goes on annually, just happened not too long ago in September, the Route 66 special event. And so a series of stations along Route 66 were issued W6A through W6M, I think it was, call signs. And the fun was to try to work as many of these Route 66 special event stations as you possibly can. They just issued those call signs for a period of time, and then they will expire. So your club, for example, if you've got a special event coming up, could apply for a special event call sign with the FCC and get a 1x1 to use for that special event. Alrighty, some questions. Section 7.4, who may select a desired call sign under the vanity call sign rules?
Alpha.
Not Alpha.
D.
Yes, I told you when you get your technician license, and if you don't like it, you can change it using the vanity call sign process. So any licensed amateur can use that process to change their call sign. Which of the following is a valid technician class call sign format?
Delta.
Not Delta.
Oh, it caught me.
Alpha.
Alpha is the right answer. These are too short. This is a 2x1, and this is a 1x2. Both of these are probably restricted to extra class operators only. So yeah, this is up here is a 2x3. That would be okay for technician class operators.
It
And-
caught me.
I caught, yeah. So guess what, folks? That's the end of Chapter 7. I told you we're going to get out early tonight. Now's a good chance. If you've got any questions or comments that you'd like to make, feel free.
Whenever you were finishing your last class with us, you and the other teacher were going to do some kind of contest. How did that end up turning out?
So in the end, I did not operate in the ARRL single sideband DX contest, but my friend Dave Ivey, KE4EA, did. He wait, 700 and some odd contacts? I don't remember.
Wow.
Dave, how many contacts did he make?
614,
614. And how many did you make, Bruce?
140.
140. So yeah, both Bruce and Dave operated in the contest, and it was a fun thing. It was a fun event. I decided in the end I wanted to sleep and rest my knee.
Well, them guys are fast.
Yes, indeed.
Well,
Okay.
tell him I said congratulations.
Will do, absolutely. So next week, Chapter 8 is another regulations class. This was licensing regulations. Next week, it'll be operating regulations. So please read the chapter before next week. And until then, 73, see you.
Gary.